Have you ever climbed a mountain? I am one who has known mountains late in my life, for I was born and lived on a wide plain, that plain of central Luzon. And I knew only one mountain that seemingly sprang from nowhere, and that was Mount Arayat. That was why mountains were a novelty for me. I would see them from afar. And later, every time I climbed one, I would experience an exhilarating feeling. Mount Gonzales, more popularly known as Palace in the Sky, we climbed it when we were aspirants on foot from the mansion of the Marcoses down and then up. Also Mount Makiling, Mount Canlaon, Mount Banahaw, even later on Mount Batulao, Mount Pinatubo, 9 years after its eruption. But nothing can compare with that experience of Mount Pulag. That was a peak experience, literally, for it was the highest point of Luzon, the rooftop of the Cordilleras, and that time, the second highest peak, known peak in the Philippines. Now I think they've discovered a peak between Apo and Mount Pulag in terms of height. And yeah, that climb was a peak experience spiritually, for it shook me hard and opened my eyes to the beauty of God's creation, the flora and the fauna, the limpid water, the fresh air, the stars, once invisible, now at their brightest. There were no clouds above because they were all below us. Yes, I saw the beauty of God 2 nights at the peak, more powerful than a week of retreat. It is no wonder that we find many of our retreat houses in the heights where it would not be difficult to find in quiet moments, in the encounters with God, peak experiences, spiritual ones that are affirmed by being in a literally high place. Dear friends, what did we see in today's readings, in particular in the first reading and in the Gospel? High places, Mount Moriah, Mount Tabor. The trip of Abraham to Mount Moriah must have been a tedious and weary one, not because he was an aged man. He was advanced in age, yes, but it was not the reason. An aged man who trudged an upward path. Not that, but because his heart was heavy. He was going up to Mount Moriah because he was asked by God to offer his son, his only son, as a burnt offering. But we know the story. He was put to the test, and right at the moment when he was about to kill Isaac, an angel stopped him. And there God confirmed his covenant with Abraham because of his obedience, a peak experience. Now going to the Gospel, the hearts of the disciples who were with Jesus were no less heavy as they climbed Mount Tabor. Life must have been tough for Peter, James, and John, and the rest of the disciples who were left behind, who have answered the call to follow Jesus. And at this point, when they were still struggling with questions about who Jesus was, they were told by him that he would suffer violently. He would be rejected and be put to death. They were told that they had to renounce themselves and take up their cross. Have they made the right choice in following Jesus, or were they mistaken? A few days just before that, Peter professed that Jesus was the Messiah. To that question, who do you say that I am? You are the Messiah. And this would have consoled them. However, when Jesus spoke of the suffering and death that he would undergo, he was rebuked by Peter, who argued that it should not happen. And Jesus strongly corrected Peter and called him Satan, for he was thinking not God's way, but man's way. Now, 6 days later, here on Mount Tabor, Jesus is transfigured, shining brightly before them. In fact, it's a beautiful description. It's like a description, an ad for a detergent, such as no fuller would make it that bright. But anyway, it was a foretaste of the coming in glory that he has told them. With Jesus there appeared Moses and Elijah. And what a wonder this must be for the disciples. There was fear in them as they witnessed this in awe. And we cannot discount that this also happens in our lives, that God gives us these strong moments. Just when we thought that everything is monotonous, just when we thought that everything is all downhill and hopeless, He sends us these joyful consolations. I myself cry and sigh in relief many times when I feel God's embracing me despite my failures. And even then, life goes on, for we also have to come down from the mountain. A consolation thus came for the 3 disciples as they heard the words, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." The wondrous scene came to an end, and Peter, James, and John were back and would go back to their ordinary days with Jesus. Their hearts were heavy before, but this time their hearts may have become more hopeful because they were given a foretaste of what will come in the end, a peak experience. Dear friends, we see in Isaac and Jesus 2 common things that are important. Only son. Maybe this is something where a good number of you may resonate. Maybe they have their only child. But yeah, Isaac and Jesus, only son. And then, beloved. Those are the words used in both readings. And the respective trips to the mountains were a defining moment, a common denominator that was important. In Isaac's case, the obedience of Abraham was tested, and the old man passed with flying colors. In the case of Jesus, the transfiguration would not be the end. The peak experience would proceed to Jerusalem, another height, and indeed to another mountain, Mount Calvary. And there the obedience of Jesus would shine. But there would be no voice to stop the sacrifice. Jesus would die. But the transfiguration is the message for the disciples that this death is not the end. Many times when we watch a movie, we are held in suspense. But when we have watched the movie, even those moments that somehow hold everyone in suspense, they do not anymore pose as fearful to us. Why? Because we know the ending. And this is the transfiguration for these disciples. Yet they're troubled, but now they know that the death is not the end. And these 3, Peter, James, and John, who would later see Jesus in his deepest humiliation in the garden, they now have a glimpse of their Lord in glory. At the time they were bombarded with predictions of Jesus' suffering and death, the transfiguration of Jesus gave them hope and strength. So, my dear friends, what does this mean for us? I know that all of us, we have our respective peak experiences. Ano ba yung mga matitinding karanasan ninyo? Maybe when the girl you were courting said yes, yung matamis niyang oo, narinig mo. Wow, that's a peak experience. When you got married, perhaps if we ask you, what's the happiest moment in your life? When I got married. Or when you had your first child. or when your son or daughter finished college, or when you passed the board exam, or something even more simple, when you made your retreat, when you received God's forgiveness in the sacrament of reconciliation, when you pray and experience God's presence. These are all peaks. Today, assisting me in the Mass is Reverend Widi from Indonesia. He must be known to many of you. And yesterday was a peak experience. After this 4 years of studies in theology, yesterday they had their comprehensive exam, oral comprehensive exam. And I was one of the panelists who examined him. And right after that, it was a peak experience for him. He passed with flying colors. Cum laude siya, no? Palapakan natin, no, sa Reverend Widi. Maybe it's a common experience for us. These are strong moments. But they would not have any meaning if we did not go up together with the Lord. Maybe suffering. Maraming mga may experience na, yung pinakamagandang experience ko, no, I was sitting down in a corner and then maybe in a beautiful place, and then a butterfly would fly by me, and then I suddenly feel so happy. Yeah, that could be a good experience. But what would be a glorious experience? What would be comparable to the Transfiguration and what it represents? It's that we have to pass through the Paschal mystery. We have to suffer. We have to die with the Lord in order to be able to savor glory. And that is the meaning of what Jesus told the disciples when they were going down. Do not tell anybody. Why? If you tell everybody, then they would think that everything is glory, that there will be no more meaning in going up to Jerusalem, in suffering, in dying. 2 words for that, messianic secret. Kaya ayaw pamalita ng Panginoon pag may napagaling siya. Huwag mo muna ipagsabihan. Because they might think that everything would be like that there will be no more suffering. And that is the value of suffering in life, that climbing up the mountain for all of us. Ano ba yung saysay nitong ating pagdurusan, nitong ating, especially what we do during the Lenten season, our sacrifices. What gives meaning to it is the Paschal mystery that we will celebrate after the Lenten season at the end. The Transfiguration serves as a glimpse of Jesus' divine glory, encouraging us to recognize His authority and teachings in our lives. In the chaos of our world, the divine voice still calls us to listen to Jesus, and that is the important thing. Listen to Him, to heed His words of love, compassion, and redemption. Today we commemorate Our Lady, the Help of Christians. It's the 24th of the month. And therefore we think about Mary also. What were the peak experiences of Mary? They must have been so many. Maybe sometimes mixed feelings. The Annunciation, you would be the Mother of God. What could be a higher experience than that? The Visitation, she was called blessed by Elizabeth. And that the one that she carried in her womb, Jesus, somehow moved John the Baptist in the womb of Elizabeth. And thereby after that she magnified the Lord. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. And then even after that, the birth of Jesus, the presentation at the temple, the finding in the temple. And how beautiful that moment must have been when she held the newborn Jesus in her arms. But she would also go down from the mountain, the humdrum of daily life. Those sorrowful moments, and ones that were rather precarious, their flight to Egypt, etc. The suffering that came with being the mother of Jesus, the sword that pierced her heart. She would also, like Abraham, go up with a heavy heart to the mountain, to Calvary. But as we know, Good Friday would lead to Easter Sunday. Dear friends, it is timely that on the second Sunday of Lent, we experience going up to Mount Tabor to remind us that the 40 days of Lent lead us to the resurrection and the peak experience of our being Christians. That is the peak experience, the Paschal Triduum. It is a reminder that all our sufferings and all our sacrifices are meaningful. Why? Because they are all experienced in Jesus. God bless us all.